Every story has a turning point, a moment where pressure stops being something you carry and becomes something that crushes you. For me, part four marks the point where the harassment, the surveillance, the fear, and the psychological weight finally collided with real life in a way I could no longer outrun. Up to this moment, I was fighting battles on multiple fronts: the trauma I brought home from war, the years of unexplained targeting, the strain on my marriage, and the responsibility of raising my children through all of it. But in this next chapter, everything intensifies. The pressure becomes constant, the invasion becomes personal, and every part of my life, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, begins to break under the weight of something I still couldn't identify or stop. This is the part of the story most people never see, the part where the fear becomes daily, where the lines between danger and paranoia blur because the harassment is so persistent, so overwhelming, that your mind stops knowing what's normal. This is where I begin losing the things that grounded me: sleep, security, trust, privacy, my marriage, and even my ability to think clearly. This is where survival stops being a figure of speech and becomes the mission. Part four isn't just about what happened to me. It's about what happens to anyone pushed far beyond the breaking point. The exhaustion, the confusion, the isolation, the silent suffering, and the terrifying moment when the mind whispers, maybe they'd all be better without me. But this chapter also marks something else: the moment right before the fight to rebuild begins, before clarity, before truth, before survival turns into recovery. This is part four, the breaking point, and it's where the story takes its darkest turn, before the light begins to return.
What happened next pushed everything into a new and dangerous phase. The threat that had been building for years became real the day I crossed paths with a man named Pat Nelson. I had just dropped Victoria off at daycare and stopped at the Dollar General like I always did for an energy drink. That's when he appeared, standing in line wearing a wounded warrior hat, his wife behind him, staring at me with intent. Without warning, he rammed his shopping cart into me, hard. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. It was a message. I reacted like any normal person would, confused, angry, and wondering why a grown man would provoke a stranger for no reason. Later, I would learn just how orchestrated this moment really was. A fake video surfaced, showing a man who wasn't even me, edited to make me look violent. It was staged, rehearsed, crafted to build a false narrative. And it wasn't an isolated incident. Shortly after, at Samuel's football game, a woman intentionally slammed into Silas while he sat in his stroller. I watched it happen. The people around us weren't surprised. They were waiting for it, as if they had been told it would happen. When these people couldn't break me, they went after my children. Pat and the men he associated with escalated further. He even tried to run me off the road one evening. I finally drove to his home and told him to leave my family alone. At the time, I didn't know what role he played in the bigger picture. Maybe he was connected to the break-ins. Maybe he was part of the digital harassment. Maybe he was simply the face they put in front of me to send a message. All I knew was that he kept appearing, at the store, at the park, in places where no one should coincidentally show up, over and over again. And yet, it didn't stop. Stefania and I were drowning under the pressure. The house, our home, our sanctuary, was monitored. Every conversation felt unsafe. Every room felt violated. We weren't allowed to be normal spouses, to have normal intimacy, to even argue like normal couples. I lost the ability to focus, to sleep, to study. She lost her security. And as the harassment intensified, fear replaced everything. Silas began wetting the bed from separation anxiety. I couldn't drive anywhere without being followed, from Georgia to Houston, Colorado, Las Vegas, and Phoenix. I left home more than a dozen times just to breathe, only to be followed again. We thought, both of us, that we had to be perfect just to keep the house we had fought to build. But how do you stay perfect when your privacy has been stolen? How do you be a husband when someone is controlling your medications? How do you be a man when you're afraid your home life is being recorded and twisted? We were trapped, monitored, humiliated, cut off from support. And through it all, I kept asking the same question. Who in this country has the right to target a family like this? I served 20 years. I deployed. I bled.
People died beside me so we could have freedom and privacy, and yet someone, some group, decided I didn't deserve either. If someone truly believed I didn't belong in my own home, in my own country, and used illegal surveillance, intimidation, and psychological warfare to enforce it, then those individuals weren't patriots. They were terrorists. And the toll it took on my marriage was devastating. We stopped being husband and wife. We became two people surviving under the same roof, afraid to touch, afraid to speak, afraid to be human. I couldn't even take university courses online because my devices were compromised. My sex life, my privacy, my dignity, every part of who I was, had been stripped away. The stalking wasn't just harassment, it was a siege, and it was designed to destroy me from the inside out. People kept telling me that the burden of proof was on me, like I somehow needed to build a legal case while my life was falling apart. But we don't ask victims of criminal activity in this country to prove the crime themselves. That's why we have law enforcement. That's why entire government institutions exist. If every victim had to investigate their own case, we wouldn't need police, detectives, or the justice system. We could all just run around interrogating people and carrying out our own justice. Anyone, any leader, pastor, official, or citizen who believes victims should prove they are being targeted should never be trusted to lead anyone. This was not a joke. It destroyed my family and caused damage that cannot be undone. It was a nightmare. I kept running because my home was being broken into, my phone was being monitored, my car was being tracked, and I was being physically stalked around town. Every time I bought a new cell phone, trying desperately to contact someone for help, the calls were intercepted. Someone was intentionally preventing me from reaching safety. There were days when I was stalked even while dropping my kids off at school, and I asked myself, would any pastor tolerate strangers monitoring his home, listening to him be intimate with his wife, or worse, living with the fear that someone could take revenge porn-style photos in the privacy of his own home, ruining his career and reputation? This invasion destroyed my marriage. It damaged my relationship with my children. My anxiety spiked so high I couldn't take care of them the way they deserved. We even had to send Victoria back to Bulgaria because the stalking made life unbearable. The constant surveillance, in my home, in my car, on my phone, wore me down. I went to law enforcement to stop the criminal activity, but nothing changed. Then one day, while taking my kids to the park, women on the radio started targeting me about infidelity. I had been hearing these attacks for a decade. That's when I knew. This wasn't random. This was a coordinated effort to break me. After all those years, something inside me finally snapped. I drove home, grabbed a gas can, poured it on the TV stand, and set it on fire. Not to harm anyone, but because I believed it was the only way left to get attention on the ongoing criminal activity. After nearly 10 years of harassment, I was desperate. I left the house and drove to Noonan, sat at a park for an hour, then returned to LaGrange. The house was filled with smoke, but the fire I started couldn't have caused that level of destruction. I've built bonfires my whole life. A quick pour of fuel doesn't do that. Whoever was watching my home helped that fire along. And honestly, the physical damage didn't concern me anymore. Compared to the psychological damage to my kids, my finances, my life, the house was the least of my worries. People may think I acted rashly, but none of this was meant to help me. Every part of it was meant to hurt me. I'm angry because I can't get back all the years I lost. People tried to help from afar, but what we really needed was someone physically there with us in LaGrange. Someone who could see what was happening and stop it before it destroyed everything. When we moved into the small rental home on the south side of LaGrange after the fire, I thought, for the first time in a long time, that I might finally get some privacy. I hoped the harassment would stop, that the pressure would ease, that maybe life would calm down enough for me to breathe again. But it didn't. Instead, everything escalated. The monitoring followed me into that house. The strange activity continued. And then came the moments I still have trouble explaining. Moments when I became dangerously sick inside my own home. I remember collapsing by the toilet, crying out to God, asking Him to make it stop. I couldn't understand why this was happening or who was behind it, but the intent felt clear. Remove me, silence me, or break me. whether that meant jail, a mental hospital, or something even worse. The pressure was pushing me in that direction. The only thing that kept me grounded during those nights was singing Christian music, just to get my mind off what was happening. It sounds strange, but it was real. It was survival. The stalking went on for so long that my mental health finally collapsed. By the time I left for Phoenix to work for Veterans Affairs, I was barely holding myself together. It took almost a year and a half to recover, and even then, I was still being targeted in my apartment there. The only reason I managed to heal at all was because I didn't have the responsibility of caring for my kids during that period, though being away from them broke me in its own way. As for the people who broke into my home and took my military records, my coins, my personal effects, whoever they were, their behavior revealed how far some individuals will go when obsession turns into fixation. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't curiosity. It was sickness. It was people living vicariously through a life they never had and never earned, trying to steal pieces of mine instead. These weren't harmless intrusions. These weren't pranks. These were violations that followed me everywhere, even into church, a place that should have been safe, a place that should have offered mercy instead of whispers, a place where no one should have to worry about being watched, judged, or targeted. This chapter of my life taught me something brutally clear. Some people don't just cross boundaries, they erase them. And when you're the one being hunted, privacy becomes a memory, safety becomes a question, and faith becomes the only thing left to hold on to.
The day I had to leave. I'll never forget my last day in Georgia. By then, the pressure from everything I had endured was crushing me from every direction. The stalking, the moments of being poisoned and violently sick, the wiretaps, the break-ins, watching Silas get targeted at the football game, being harassed by Pat Nelson, calling law enforcement again and again and getting no real help. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Am I being set up? On that final day, Stephania came home angry. My mental health was already hanging by a thread, and the tension in that house felt like a trap closing in. Once you know you've hit your limit, really hit it, you either stay and break, or you leave to survive. When she yelled at me, it wasn't her voice I heard the loudest. It was the constant pressure of being monitored inside my own home. Every argument, every whisper, every moment of vulnerability. I knew I couldn't stay. Whoever wiretapped that house knew exactly how worn down I was, and I wasn't willing to let myself get destroyed inside those four walls. But the part that still haunts me is Victoria, her crying, her begging, her voice breaking as she said, "Daddy, don't leave me." That moment cut deeper than anything I ever saw in combat, deeper than the sound of the man burning in the truck next to me overseas. This was my child, my little girl, crying for a father who was being pushed out of his own home. So I took the car seat out of my truck, packed what I could, and left for Colorado. It wasn't a choice, it was survival. From Georgia to Colorado, then Nevada to see my dad, and finally Phoenix. I wasn't wandering, I was escaping. Before I left, I made sure Stephania had everything she needed. The full $180,000 equity from the house. Her school debt paid off with the fire insurance money. The backyard swimming pool paid off with my back pay. Then I lived off a credit card while sending her my entire retirement check, $937 a month, for child support. People don't see that part. They only see that I left. Stephania still blames me. But I'm human, and humans have limits. What hurts the most is realizing I fought for a country that promised freedom from oppression, yet couldn't protect my own family from the harassment that tore us apart. I never wanted to leave my kids. I never wanted this outcome. I just wanted a chance to raise them in peace. I still love her. I always will. But survival isn't abandonment. It's the only reason I'm still alive to tell this story. Targeted in the one place meant to help. When I arrived in Arizona, I finally felt like I had a chance to rebuild. I attended a job fair, interviewed, and secured a position with Veterans Affairs. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to serve other veterans while trying to recover from everything I had just escaped in Georgia. But almost immediately, the same pattern followed me. During training, a large Hispanic man took down my VoIP number. After that, the calls began, one after another, from fake veteran profiles, all scripted, all coordinated, and all centered around deeply personal topics that had no place in a federal workplace. Every caller claimed to be a cancer patient, yet each conversation had the same theme: references to my private life that no stranger should know. VA leadership was aware. They heard the calls, they saw what was happening. They did nothing. Instead of intervening, they watched it unfold. At the same time, harassment outside of work escalated. My apartment was broken into. Someone tampered with my food more than once. People were following me in public. I filed a complaint with VA Equal Opportunity, but instead of protecting me, they covered the misconduct. Everyone in the building, and even people from the surrounding community, seemed to know what was happening. I recognized voices from American Legion Post 61. There were attempts to bait me into a DUI. I was stalked at the gym. People tracked my movements all across the state. When I tried to tell leadership I was being targeted, they brushed it aside and told me to claim it as a disability. That was the moment I realized they weren't trying to help me. They were trying to discredit me. Their solution was to assign me audiobooks for nearly 2 years, busy work, instead of addressing the harassment. Then they fabricated a reason to release me. The entire situation had the feel of a setup, and being under constant pressure made my mental health spiral. By this point, I had been stalked for nearly a decade. 10 years of pressure, 10 years of intrusion, 10 years of psychological warfare. Under this kind of unrelenting stress, a person begins to behave out of character. You make decisions you normally wouldn't make. You react to rumors, humiliation, and harassment in ways that don't reflect who you truly are. That's what long-term targeting does to the mind. It distorts your sense of self, your judgment, and your confidence. I struggled with self-image and insecurity because of the constant attack on my personal life. I made decisions I wouldn't have made if I had been living in a safe, stable environment. None of these moments happened in a vacuum. They were the direct result of sustained harassment, humiliation, and psychological pressure. Looking back, the most shocking part isn't the behavior of a few individuals. It's the scale. By the time everything reached its peak, hundreds of people were involved in following, monitoring, or interfering with my life. When I finally contacted Phoenix police, they classified what was happening as gang stalking. I was alone in a new state, under surveillance, isolated from my children, and stripped of the support that every veteran deserves. And somehow, through faith, instinct, and sheer will, I survived it. Given the circumstances, my recovery still feels like a miracle. Even after my divorce from Stefania, the harassment didn't die with the marriage. It followed me across state lines like a predator tracking its prey. My phone was still being monitored. My apartment at 5150 North 99th Avenue, Glendale, Arizona, was broken into more than once. It reached a point where I couldn't safely date or trust anyone, because every attempt at rebuilding my life was watched, interrupted, or sabotaged. Then came one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Within my first months in Phoenix in early 2020, I realized I had been poisoned. It hit suddenly, violently. I began vomiting uncontrollably, shaking, and collapsing into confusion. My speech slurred. My heart raced out of control. No amount of water calmed the unrelenting thirst. My muscles twitched as if electricity were misfiring inside me. And I knew instantly, this wasn't alcohol. This wasn't food poisoning. This was deliberate. I went to Dr. Brady in Avondale, desperate for answers. But by the time I was seen, it was too late. The damage was already done. The break-ins didn't stop. The harassment didn't stop. The poisoning didn't stop. More than once, I was given something that felt like a stimulant, a substance that spiked my blood pressure and heart rate. And this would always be followed by signs inside my apartment that someone had entered while I was gone. About a year later, my kidney function tests showed sudden damage. Not gradual, not age-related, sudden, like someone had flipped a switch inside my body. And then came the psychological warfare.
Certain men in public began shaking their right hands, mimicking tremors, as if to signal that I had suffered some kind of neurological attack. A twisted form of gaslighting, a coded message meant to remind me, we poisoned you, we can do it again. One day, I returned home to find a rag from my laundry hamper placed conspicuously on the table, a violation meant to taunt me, to tell me I had no privacy, no safety, no sanctuary. Right after that, strangers began walking past me in public, holding rags in their hands like silent threats. The symbolism was clear. We can enter your home whenever we want. The pattern matched everything I had endured years earlier at 137 Montrose Way in LaGrange, Georgia. The exact same behaviors, the same signals, the same psychological tactics. It was the reason I fled Georgia, and now it was happening in Arizona. So I had to ask myself, who told these people to do this? What rumor did they hear? What narrative was used to justify putting me through this for years? Did someone tell them that if I recovered and found work, they would lose their VA benefits? Because if that was the influence behind their behavior, then it was no different from placing an indirect hit on me, turning me into a target for a decade. For me, it wasn't just harassment anymore. It was confirmation of everything I had been saying since 2012. And it was a reminder that the danger always came from the shadows, even when the sun was shining. There's something every American needs to understand before they judge any part of my story. Every service member, every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine stands before the flag and makes a promise to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Not for applause, not for a paycheck, but because the oath becomes part of who you are. It settles in your chest and never leaves. That promise is supposed to restrain you when your emotions, grudges, or insecurities push you toward wrongdoing. It's meant to keep you anchored to the law, to morality, to the basic duty of protecting the innocent. And that is why what happened to me is so serious. Because when people, especially prior service members, take part in stalking, harassment, intimidation, or psychological targeting, they don't just break the law, they break the oath. And an oath breaker is far more dangerous than an enemy. An enemy attacks from the outside. An oath breaker attacks from within. What was done to me wasn't gossip. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't drama. It was criminal interference carried out or supported by people who once stood before the flag and swore to do the opposite. They used the discipline, coordination, and training this country gave them, not to protect an American citizen, but to harm one. Not foreign, domestic, not defender, threat, not service member, violator of the Constitution. When someone with a military background participates in or ignores organized harassment, intimidation, surveillance, or psychological warfare, it is more than unethical. It is a betrayal of the uniform and the nation itself. Because the Constitution they swore to defend is not symbolic. It is the shield that protects people like me and like you. It is the boundary that stops tyranny. It is supposed to guarantee that no American lives in fear inside their own home. So let me speak this plainly. Anyone who targets, stalks, intimidates, or harasses an American citizen violates the law. A service member who does it violates the oath. That is a double betrayal, one against a person and one against the country. And that is why this cannot stay silent. Silence protects the guilty. Truth protects the nation. When faith meets persecution. Through everything I've survived, I have never doubted that long-term mental illness is real. But in my case, it was never the cause. My mind wasn't broken. It was overloaded by an environment designed to push me past human limits. And every time the pressure eased, my clarity returned. That tells me everything I need to know about what really happened. The truth is simple. If the environment had been safe, this wouldn't have happened to me. I was so angry, so violated, that I drove across the country exercising every freedom this nation promises its citizens. Because this is the United States,
We are not Iran, Afghanistan, or China. We don't stalk people to see if they sin. We don't persecute people into madness. At least, we're not supposed to. And for me, persecution wasn't a minor hardship. It was the greatest test of my faith. It wasn't temptation that pushed me to the edge. It was people acting like judge, jury, and executioner over things they didn't understand, didn't witness, or simply chose to weaponize. Like I've always said, if you persecute someone for sin, they will run to sin. It's the opposite of what Scripture teaches. It's the opposite of what Jesus modeled. The prodigal son wasn't told to get out because he embarrassed his father. The woman at the well wasn't condemned. She was met with mercy. James teaches restoration, not destruction. But modern Christianity has too many people who skim Facebook devotionals, say amen, and never open a Bible. They'll apply Scripture to others, but never to themselves. They'll correct your sin, but ignore their own. Everyone sins, but not everyone weaponizes faith to justify cruelty. Then there is the physical toll. I still don't know what long-term damage the poisoning caused. Kidney damage, neurological symptoms, confusion, that doesn't just disappear. And none of this was accidental. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't environmental. This was intentional. And intentional poisoning is attempted murder. I was also drugged with stimulants, harassed in my home, and had my belongings tampered with. My rifle scope misaligned, my compound bow moved, personal items rearranged. I lived alone, which made me an easier target, and the people doing this knew it. From 2019 to 2022 in Phoenix, they hit me financially too. Motorcycle stolen, bike and e-bike stolen, bike vandalized, people trying to crash into my truck, harassment at work and on the phones, followed around to see if I was drinking, as if trying to manufacture a reason to blame me instead of the poisoning. It was coordinated, it was persistent, and it only happened to me, in that specific area. At some point, I began to wonder whether someone spread a rumor or claimed they'd lose benefits if I recovered, or tried to paint me as a threat to justify what they were doing. Because otherwise, why would anyone go this far? Why would anyone escalate to poisoning? Why would hundreds of people be involved in harassment that lasted years? The level of intent felt no different from the evil I saw overseas. And I'll say this plainly, anyone who poisons a combat veteran is no better than the regimes we fought against. What Saddam did to the Kurdish people is not far from what was done to me. Slow, quiet, deniable harm designed to erase someone without ever pulling a trigger. Maybe those involved believed I would die before ever speaking the truth. Maybe they hoped I'd disappear so they would never have to answer for what they did to my family. But I'm still here, and I won't stop telling the truth. The civil rights violations against my family. My VA compensation was never designed to address what was done to me. Disability ratings are meant to compensate for service-connected medical conditions, not for criminal conduct, stalking, harassment, or civil rights violations. And what my family endured over the last decade cannot be measured in a percentage or a monthly payment. I have seen younger veterans with a fraction of my service time receive the same compensation I do. That is not the issue. Veterans deserve care. But my question is fundamentally different. Where is the remedy for the deliberate violations of my constitutional rights? Where is the accountability for the criminal acts committed against me and my family? Because at this point, nothing that happened to us falls under a veteran problem. It is a civil liberties problem, a privacy invasion problem, a criminal conduct across state lines problem. Under federal law, the following acts are violations: unauthorized wiretapping of a private residence, 18 U.S.C. Section 2511, interstate stalking, 18 U.S.C. Section 2261, a cyber stalking and harassment, use of GPS or digital means to track a private citizen, break-ins of a private residence, coercion to reveal intimate personal details, retaliatory actions designed to silence or intimidate a victim. These are felonies.
Not misunderstandings, not moral disagreements, not private matters. I shared the most intimate details of my private life in this book because I was forced into a position no American should ever be placed in, coerced into confessing personal matters under pressure, stalked inside my own home, and targeted every time I tried to relocate. And the question any reasonable person must ask is this: would you want an individual or group to possess unrestricted access to your private life, to force you to explain your personal relationships, to harass you into emotional collapse? That was my reality for 10 years. Every violation, every intrusion, every illegal act was a direct attack on my constitutional rights: my right to privacy, my right to safety, my right to move freely without fear. These weren't abstract harms. They were measurable damages: loss of electronic devices, loss of thousands of dollars trying to protect my privacy, loss of mental stability, loss of security in my home, loss of my children, my marriage, and my family stability, loss of community and support networks. The emotional damage was profound, but the legal damage is equally clear. My civil rights were violated repeatedly and deliberately. The harassment I endured was not comparable to military combat. It was worse for a simple reason: it never stopped. Combat ends. Deployments end. This did not. The chronic duration of the abuse caused physical, emotional, and psychological harm that will never be fully undone. And yet, I recovered, not because of medication or therapy, but because of faith. The same faith that carried me after my suicide attempt in 2015 carried me again through this ordeal. But faith does not negate the legal reality. A crime was committed. Many crimes were committed, and they were committed across multiple jurisdictions and state lines. All I want now is what every American citizen is guaranteed under the Constitution: the right to live without unlawful surveillance, coercion, intimidation, or persecution. My family deserved that. I deserve that. And it is time to acknowledge that what happened to us was not a misunderstanding. It was a violation.